The Forgotten. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The relentless beeping of an alarm clock ripped through the fog of Jack Sullivan's mind, dragging him out of a deep sleep. His hand fumbled in the darkness, silencing the intrusive noise. He sat up, blinking into the dim light of the early morning, trying to shake off the remnants of a troubling dream. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Jack swung his legs over the side of the bed and stared at the floor, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. He glanced around the room, a place he'd known for years, yet it seemed oddly unfamiliar. The pictures on the walls, the furniture, even the smell of the room. It all felt wrong, as if he had been dropped into a replica of his own life that was missing some crucial element. Shrugging off the unease, he shuffled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The face staring back at him in the mirror was the same as it had always been. Early 30s, dark hair beginning to thin, a face marked by the stresses of a life lived without much excitement. But today, those familiar brown eyes held a flicker of something else, a spark of fear that had no clear origin. Jack dressed quickly, eager to start his day and shake off the strange feeling. He left his apartment, locking the door behind him, and stepped into the brisk morning air. The world outside seemed normal. Cars hummed along the street, people walked by with their heads buried in phones, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from a nearby cafe. Yet, the unease lingered. As he walked toward the subway station, Jack noticed people glancing at him, their eyes lingering a little too long. He met their gazes, expecting recognition, but saw only confusion and then indifference. It was unsettling, but he told himself he was being paranoid. Maybe he just had one of those faces. The subway was crowded as usual, but as Jack squeezed into the packed car, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He recognized the faces of the regular commuters, people he saw every day, but today they all seemed different, colder, more distant. No one returned his nods of acknowledgement. Instead, they shifted away from him, as if he were a stranger, an intruder in their daily routine. When Jack arrived at his office building, the unease hit him like a tidal wave. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Lisa who greeted him every morning, looked up with a blank expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Jack frowned. "Lisa, it's me, Jack Sullivan." She tilted her head, eyebrows furrowing. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" A chill ran down his spine. "Of course we do. I work here. I've been working here for 5 years." She shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I've seen you before." Jack's heart raced. He forced a laugh, hoping to break the tension. "Come on, Lisa. Stop messing with me." But her expression didn't change. "Sir, if you're not here on business, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The world tilted beneath Jack's feet. He turned away from the reception desk and headed toward the elevators, hoping that a familiar face might explain this bizarre situation. But as he stepped out onto his floor, the usual bustle of the office came to a screeching halt. His colleagues looked up from their desks, their faces blank and unfamiliar. "Who are you?" one of them asked. Jack's blood ran cold. "It's me, Jack. Jack Sullivan." No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at him, their eyes empty, as if he were a ghost. An invisible man suddenly made flesh. Panic bubbled up inside him, and he backed away, fleeing down the stairwell and out of the building. He burst onto the street, gasping for air, his mind racing. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. But what? He hadn't changed. He was the same man he had been yesterday, the same man he'd always been. But to everyone else, he was a stranger. Jack's thoughts spiraled as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was it a prank? A cruel joke? But the fear in their eyes had been real, the confusion genuine. It was as if he had been erased from their memories. The possibility made his stomach turn. Had he fallen into some parallel universe where no one knew him? Or was there something more sinister at play? A darker force that had somehow wiped his existence from the minds of everyone he knew? Jack looked around at the bustling city, at the strangers who now filled his world, and felt a crushing loneliness settle over him. He was a ghost in his own life, a man without an identity, and he had no idea how to get it back. Chapter 2. The Encounter. Jack wandered the streets, his mind a storm of confusion and fear. He replayed the events of the morning over and over, searching for a clue, a hint of what might have caused this nightmare. But nothing made sense. He hadn't changed, yet everyone around him had. He reached for his phone, desperate for a connection to his old life, something to anchor him to reality. His fingers trembled as he dialed his mother's number, praying that she would pick up, that her familiar voice would dispel this waking nightmare. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked to voicemail. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he heard his mother's voice, a wave of relief washing over him. "Hi, you've reached the Sullivans. Leave a message after the beep." "Mom," Jack said, his voice shaking. "It's Jack. Please call me back as soon as you get this. Something's wrong. I need to talk to you." He hung up and dialed his best friend, Mike, his heart pounding in his chest. But the result was the same voicemail. Jack left a similar message, his voice growing more frantic with each call. He tried other friends, old co-workers, anyone he could think of, but no one answered. He was alone. Jack collapsed onto a bench in a small park, his head in his hands. The world around him seemed to blur, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. He felt like he was slipping away, losing his grip on reality. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Jack looked up to see a man standing in front of him. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and a kind smile that seemed out of place in Jack's darkening world. Jack blinked, struggling to focus. I don't know. I think I'm losing my mind." The man sat down beside him, concern etched on his face. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jack laughed, a hollow sound that carried no humor. "Maybe I am the ghost. Nobody knows me. Not my coworkers, not my friends. It's like I don't exist anymore." The man's expression softened. "That sounds rough. But hey, maybe it's not as bad as you think. Maybe they're just messing with you." Jack shook his head. "No, it's not like that. They were scared of me, like I was a stranger." The man was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he nodded as if coming to a decision. "You know, I've heard of something like this happening before." Jack looked at him, hope flaring in his chest. "You have?" The man nodded again, more slowly this time. "Yeah, there's a place not far from here. An old building, kind of run down. People say weird things happen there. People disappear, memories get altered." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Where is it?" The man pointed down the street. "A couple of blocks that way, on the corner of Elm and 4th. But listen, I don't know if it's true. Could just be stories." Jack didn't care. It was the first lead he had, the first hint that he wasn't completely crazy. He stood up, a renewed sense of purpose driving him forward. "Thank you. I'll check it out." The man watched him go, a strange expression on his face. "Good luck," he called after Jack. "And be careful." Jack nodded, but he was already moving, his mind focused on the building the man had mentioned. Elm and 4th. He could find it. He had to find it. As he walked, the city seemed to close in around him, the buildings looming taller, the shadows growing longer. The feeling of being watched prickled at the back of his neck, but he pushed it aside, focusing on his goal. He had to know the truth. He had to understand what had happened to his life, to his identity, and he had to do it before he lost himself completely. When Jack reached the corner of Elm and 4th, he stopped, staring at the building before him. It was old, the bricks weathered and crumbling, the windows dark and empty. A sense of foreboding washed over him, but he forced himself to take a step forward, then another. As he approached the entrance, The door creaked open on its own, as if inviting him in. Jack hesitated, fear clawing at his insides. But he couldn't turn back now. He had to know. He stepped through the doorway, into the darkness beyond. Chapter 3. The shadowed hallway. The door groaned shut behind Jack, sealing him in the oppressive darkness of the building. The air was thick with dust, and a faint, musty odor clung to every surface. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for his phone, using the screen's faint glow to illuminate his surroundings. The hallway stretched out before him, long and narrow, with doors on either side, their wooden frames warped and decayed. He hesitated, considering turning back, but something compelled him to move forward. There was an almost magnetic pull, drawing him deeper into the building. Jack's footsteps echoed in the silence, each step amplified in the narrow corridor, the sound bouncing off the walls and creating an eerie rhythm. As he walked, he noticed the doors lining the hallway were numbered, but the numbers were nonsensical, not following any logical order. Door 101 was followed by 327, then 205. It was as if the building itself defied the rules of reality, a place where logic had no hold. Jack reached out to touch one of the doors, feeling the rough, splintered wood beneath his fingertips. He hesitated, then pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, the sound reverberating through the hallway. Inside was a small, dimly lit room, empty except for a single chair in the center. Jack felt a chill as he stepped inside, the temperature dropping several degrees. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him, making it difficult to breathe. He moved closer to the chair, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but curiosity drove him forward. On the seat of the chair was a small object, a worn, leather-bound journal. Jack picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The leather was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. He opened it cautiously, the pages crinkling under his touch. The handwriting was uneven, scrawled in a hurried script that was difficult to read. Jack squinted at the words, trying to make sense of them. August 15th. They came again last night. I could hear them whispering outside the door. I know they're watching me, waiting for me to slip up. But I won't let them. I won't let them take me. Jack's hands trembled as he read the passage. He flipped through the journal, skimming the entries. The writer spoke of strange occurrences, of being followed, of voices in the night. It was a record of someone slowly losing their grip on reality, their fear and paranoia bleeding through every word. He reached the final entry, dated only a few days ago. August 22 ND. It's happening. They're erasing me just like the others. My friends don't remember me. My family looks at me like I'm a stranger. I don't have much time left. If you find this, know that you're not alone. But don't trust anyone, not even yourself. Jack closed the journal, his mind reeling. The words echoed his own experience, the fear, the isolation. Was this someone who had gone through the same thing he was now? Had they ended up here, in this forgotten place, trying to understand what was happening to them? His thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a shuffling noise, like footsteps moving cautiously down the hallway. Jack's pulse quickened. He shoved the journal into his jacket pocket and stepped out of the room, peering down the corridor. The darkness seemed to shift, shadows moving at the edge of his vision. He strained to see, holding his breath as the sound grew louder. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a figure emerged. It was a man, his features obscured by the dim light. But there was something unsettling about him, something that made Jack instinctively take a step back. The man's movements were jerky, unnatural, as if he were being pulled forward by invisible strings. He stopped several feet away, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Who are you?" Jack managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step closer, then another. Jack's breath hitched as he realized the man's eyes were hollow, empty sockets where there should have been eyes. It was as if the man's identity had been stripped away, leaving behind only a shell. Panic surged through Jack, and he turned, sprinting down the hallway. The footsteps behind him quickened, the sound of pursuit growing louder. Jack didn't dare look back. He just ran, his heart hammering in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the doors blurring together as he sped past them. The exit was nowhere in sight, but Jack didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He reached a dead end. The hallway terminated in a blank wall, and Jack skidded to a halt, his mind racing for a way out. The footsteps behind him grew closer, and Jack turned, pressing his back against the wall, facing the figure that now approached with a slow, deliberate pace. Jack's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. There was nowhere to go. The man was only feet away now, his hollow gaze fixed on Jack, his lips moving as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. In a desperate move, Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out the journal, holding it up like a shield. The man paused, his head tilting as he seemed to focus on the book. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, and then the man let out a guttural moan, retreating into the shadows, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. Jack stood there, panting, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. The hallway was silent once more, but the threat lingered, the presence of something malevolent still palpable. He knew now that he wasn't just dealing with lost memories. There was something far more sinister at work, something that had taken others before him. And it wasn't finished yet. Chapter 4. The Old Woman. Jack stumbled out of the building, gasping for air as if he had been suffocating inside. The cold, fresh air hit his lungs, clearing the fog of fear that had clouded his mind. The journal in his hand felt heavier than it should, as though the weight of the words inside it bore down on him, threatening to crush his sanity. He walked quickly, almost running, desperate to put as much distance as possible between himself and that cursed place. But no matter how far he went, the sensation of being watched clung to him like a shadow, a constant reminder that he was not alone in this nightmare. As he rounded a corner, Jack nearly collided with an elderly woman standing on the sidewalk. She was small, hunched over with age, her white hair wispy and unkempt. Her eyes, however, were sharp, gleaming with an intensity that took Jack by surprise. "Watch where you're going, young man," she said, her voice raspy but firm. Jack mumbled an apology, trying to move past her, but she grabbed his arm with a surprisingly strong grip. "You've been to the old building, haven't you?" she asked, her eyes boring into his. Jack froze, his heart skipping a beat. How do you know?" The woman's expression softened slightly, and she released his arm. "I know a lot of things, more than I wish I did. That place, it's cursed. People go in and they don't come out the same. If they come out at all." Jack swallowed hard. "What's happening to me? Why doesn't anyone remember who I am?" The woman glanced around, as if checking to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned in closer. "You've been marked. It's the building, it changes things, twists them. It doesn't just erase you from other people's memories. It erases you from existence." Jack's breath caught in his throat. "Erases me?" She nodded gravely. "It's like you're being unraveled, thread by thread. Soon, there won't be anything left of you. Not in the world, not in anyone's mind, not even in your own." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "But why? Why me?" The old woman sighed, a deep, weary sound. "It's not just you. That place has been doing this for a long time. It feeds on people, on their identities, their memories, their lives. It takes them, consumes them, and leaves behind nothing." Jack felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "How do I stop it?" The woman shook her head sadly. "You can't stop it, not completely. But there might be a way to slow it down, to buy yourself some time." Jack grasped at the hope she offered. "How?" She pointed to the journal still clutched in his hand. That book. Whoever wrote it was trying to find a way out, a way to hold on to themselves. You need to finish what they started. Find out what they knew. Jack opened the journal, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the entries for some clue, some answer that would save him. But the writing was fragmented, chaotic, the thoughts of a mind unraveling under the weight of fear. There's something else, the woman added, her voice a whisper now. There's a room in that building, a hidden room. It's where the truth is kept. If you can find it, maybe you can find a way to break the curse. Jack looked up at her, desperation in his eyes. Do you know where it is? She hesitated, then nodded. I've heard stories. It's in the basement, behind a wall that doesn't exist, at least not in the way we understand. You'll have to look for it with more than just your eyes. It's a place that can only be found by those who are willing to lose everything. Jack's pulse quickened. How do I? But before he could finish his question, the old woman stiffened, her eyes widening with fear. She backed away from him, her gaze fixed on something over his shoulder. They're here, she whispered. They're always watching, always waiting. Jack turned around, his heart pounding, but the street behind him was empty. When he looked back, the old woman was gone, vanished as if she had never been there at all. Jack stood there, his mind reeling. The street was suddenly quiet, the air heavy with a sense of impending doom. He clutched the journal tighter, his fingers digging into the worn leather. There was no turning back now. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to hold on to his very existence, he had to return to the building. He had to find the hidden room, the place where the truth was kept, and he had to do it before it was too late. Chapter 5. The Hidden Room. Jack stood in front of the old building once again, dread clawing at his insides. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out and reach for him. He steeled himself, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open and stepping into the darkness once more. The building was as silent as a tomb, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on him from all sides. Jack's footsteps echoed through the hallways as he made his way to the basement, the journal clutched tightly in his hand like a lifeline. He found the door to the basement at the end of a narrow corridor, its wood splintered and warped. It creaked ominously as he pushed it open, revealing a steep staircase descending into pitch blackness. Jack hesitated only for a moment before descending into the unknown, each step bringing him closer to whatever terrible truth awaited below. The basement was damp and cold, the air thick with the scent of mildew. Jack's phone barely pierced the darkness, its light revealing only the vague outlines of crumbling walls and forgotten debris. He moved cautiously, searching for any sign of the hidden room the old woman had mentioned. As he explored the basement, he noticed something strange. His footsteps no longer echoed. The silence was absolute, oppressive, as if the very air was swallowing the sound. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. And then he saw it, a section of the wall that seemed different, almost out of focus. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but as Jack approached, the sense of wrongness intensified. The wall seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it were made of something other than brick and mortar. Jack reached out with trembling fingers, touching the surface. It felt solid, but there was a strange resistance, as if something was pushing back against him. He pressed harder, and suddenly, the wall gave way, his hand sinking through the surface as if it were made of liquid. Jack gasped, pulling his hand back in shock. The wall rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. Gathering his courage, Jack pressed forward again, this time stepping through the wall entirely. The sensation was disorienting, like passing through a veil of cold mist. On the other side, Jack found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with a heavy, oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with strange objects. Old books, pieces of broken furniture, and what looked like personal belongings, all covered in a thick layer of dust. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay a single ancient book, its cover worn and cracked. Jack approached it cautiously, his hands shaking as he reached for it. The book seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the air around it vibrating with a low hum. Jack opened the book, his eyes scanning the pages, but the writing was strange, a language he couldn't understand. It was filled with symbols and diagrams, the meaning of which was lost to him. But as he flipped through the pages, he noticed a drawing, a depiction of a man, standing in front of a mirror, his reflection gradually fading away until nothing was left but an empty frame. Beneath the drawing was a single line, written in a language Jack could understand. To escape the void, one must confront the shadow within. Jack's mind raced, trying to piece together the meaning. The shadow within, could it be the dark figure that had chased him through the hallways? The emptiness that threatened to consume him? He suddenly felt a presence behind him, and Jack spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. The man with the hollow eyes stood in the doorway, his figure barely visible in the dim light. But this time something was different. The man's face was more defined, more real, and in his empty eye sockets, Jack could see a faint glow, like the flicker of dying embers. The man stepped forward, and Jack felt the room grow colder, the air thickening around him. He was trapped, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The figure reached out, his hand outstretched, and Jack felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over him, threatening to drown him. But then he remembered the old woman's words, the message in the journal. It doesn't just erase you from other people's memories. It erases you from existence. Jack knew he had to fight back, to resist the pull of the void. He closed his eyes, focusing on his own memories, his identity, everything that made him who he was. He thought of his mother, his friends, his life before all of this started. He concentrated on those memories, feeling them surge through him, grounding him in reality. The man hesitated, his outstretched hand trembling. Jack opened his eyes, locking onto the figure's hollow gaze. "You're not taking me," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I won't let you." The man's form flickered, as if caught between two states of existence. For a moment, Jack thought he saw a hint of recognition in those empty sockets, a flicker of something human. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, unyielding void. Jack stood his ground, his memories a shield against the darkness. Slowly, the man began to retreat, his form dissolving into shadows, the coldness in the room receding with him. The oppressive energy lifted, and Jack felt the weight on his chest ease. When the figure finally disappeared, Jack was left standing alone in the dim light, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at the ancient book, now lying closed on the table, its dark energy subdued. Whatever had been haunting him, whatever had tried to erase him, was gone. For now. But Jack knew he wasn't safe yet. The book's warning still echoed in his mind. To escape the void, one must confront the shadow within. He had faced the shadow and survived, but the fight wasn't over. Jack had to escape this place before it claimed him for good. With a final glance at the room, he turned and stepped through the shimmering wall, ready to face whatever awaited him outside. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to adjust or explore. Chapter 6. Confronting the Void. Jack's mind swirled with memories as he stood face to face with the hollow-eyed figure. The cold, oppressive darkness around him pressed in, but he fought to hold onto the warmth of his past, the essence of who he was. He thought of his mother's laugh, the scent of her cooking, the way she had always been there for him. He remembered his best friend Mike, their shared jokes, the late-night conversations that had helped him through tough times. He held on to those images, refusing to let them slip away. The figure before him shifted, its form becoming less defined, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. Jack could see the faint glow in its eye sockets flickering, like a dying flame in the wind. It reached out again, but this time Jack didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, meeting the figure's touch with his own. The moment their hands connected, Jack felt a shock of cold energy surge through him. His mind flooded with images, flashes of lives that weren't his, people he didn't know, places he had never been. But at the core of it all, he could feel the figure's emptiness, its desperate need to consume, to fill the void that had hollowed it out. Jack gritted his teeth, pushing back against the force that threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on his own memories, forcing them to the forefront of his mind. He wasn't just holding on to his identity. He was using it as a weapon, a shield against the darkness. The figure recoiled, its form distorting further, as if Jack's resistance was tearing it apart. The glow in its eyes faded to nothing, leaving only empty sockets once more. Jack could feel the pull of the void weakening, the oppressive energy around him starting to lift. "You're not taking me?" Jack growled through gritted teeth. "I won't let you." The figure let out a sound, a low, mournful wail that echoed through the room, filled with sorrow and despair. It was the cry of something that had once been human, but had long since lost everything that made it so. Jack's heart ached at the sound, but he couldn't allow himself to be swayed by pity. He had to survive. With a final surge of willpower, Jack focused every ounce of his being on pushing the figure away, forcing it back into the void from which it had emerged. The figure shrieked, its form unraveling like smoke caught in a gust of wind. The cold darkness receded, and the oppressive weight lifted from Jack's shoulders. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The room around Jack grew warmer, the shadows retreating to the corners, leaving him alone in the dim light. Jack stumbled back, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The journal in his hand felt lighter now, the oppressive energy that had clung to it dissipated. He looked down at the pages, and though he still couldn't understand the strange language, he felt a sense of closure, as if the book had served its purpose. He placed the journal back on the table, leaving it there in the hidden room. Whatever had drawn him to this place, whatever had tried to consume him, it was over. He had confronted the shadow within, and he had survived. Jack turned to leave, but as he reached the wall he had passed through, he paused. The thought of stepping back into the world outside filled him with uncertainty. Would things be different now? Would people remember him? Or had too much of him already been lost? He took a deep breath and stepped through the wall. The sensation was the same as before. A cold mist, a momentary disorientation. But when he emerged, he found himself back in the basement, standing before the crumbling walls and forgotten debris. He climbed the stairs, each step feeling lighter than the last, and pushed open the door to the main floor. The building was still and silent, but the oppressive atmosphere that had once filled it was gone. Jack stepped out into the night, the cool air a welcome relief. The street was quiet, the city seeming almost peaceful. He took a moment to gather himself, then pulled out his phone. He hesitated before dialing his mother's number, his heart pounding in his chest. The phone rang once, twice, and then, "Hello!" Jack nearly wept with relief at the sound of his mother's voice. It was warm, familiar, and filled with concern. "Mom, it's me, Jack." "Jack!" she exclaimed. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." Jack's knees nearly buckled as he heard the genuine concern in her voice. She remembered him. His heart swelled with a mixture of joy and exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been dealing with some things, but I'm okay now." They spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation grounding Jack, reminding him of who he was and where he belonged. When they finally said their goodbyes, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't lost. He wasn't forgotten. He looked back at the old building one last time, its dark windows staring out like empty eyes. Whatever had happened there, Whatever dark force had tried to consume him, it was over now. The building had lost its power over him. Jack turned away, walking down the street with a newfound sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he would never allow himself to be erased again. As he disappeared into the night, the city around him seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the darkness that had once threatened to consume him fading away, leaving only the faintest memory of what had transpired. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.